Arthur Schopenhauer, Why Smart Minds Terrify the Masses. Why is it that truly intelligent, deeply reflective individuals so often feel like outsiders in the world? Why is brilliance met with suspicion rather than celebration? We say we admire intelligence, yet history is filled with examples of the most brilliant minds being ignored, silenced, or ridiculed in their time. And Arthur Schopenhauer, perhaps more than any other philosopher, understood exactly why. He didn't just observe the tension between the thinker and the masses, he dissected it, exposed its roots, and showed us how this fear of intelligence is not a glitch in human society, it's baked into the system. According to Schopenhauer, the smart mind doesn't terrify the world because it's wrong, but because it's right. And in a world that runs on illusion, truth is the most dangerous force of all. We need to start by understanding the essence of what Schopenhauer meant when he talked about intellect. He wasn't referring to mere academic knowledge or the accumulation of facts. For him, real intelligence was the capacity to see through the veil, to recognize that nulls underlies all existence, to confront the brutality of the world without flinching, and to not be seduced by the trivial distractions that most people cling to. He believed that the average person lives in what he called a dreamlike state, absorbed in trivial pleasures, social games, and surface-level thinking. And while that dream offers comfort, it also creates a collective delusion, a prison of shallow norms. And when someone comes along who sees too clearly, who refuses to play along, it doesn't inspire people. It threatens them.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
That threat is not just intellectual, it's existential. Because when a truly intelligent person speaks, they don't just offer knowledge, they dismantle the scaffolding of the world we thought we understood. And this can be terrifying. The masses want stability, not transformation. They want answers that reinforce their worldview, not questions that tear it apart. That's why people cheer for conventional success but recoil at radical honesty. And Schopenhauer had little patience for this. He called the general public shallow, envious, and hostile to true greatness, not because they were evil, but because they were unconscious. He saw mass society as a kind of protective bubble designed to keep reality at bay. And the smart mind, that's the needle. Here's the disturbing part: the smarter you are, the lonelier your path becomes. Schopenhauer wrote that the more a person thinks, the more they are forced into solitude. And this isn't some poetic exaggeration, it's an observation rooted in human psychology. When you start to question everything, why we work the way we do, why we chase status, why we distract ourselves with entertainment, you inevitably become alienated from those who still believe in the game. They call you cynical, arrogant, negative. But what they're really saying is, you make me uncomfortable. Because when you stop playing along, you reveal that the game itself is optional. And that terrifies people who've built their entire identity around it. Have you ever had that moment where you say something profoundly honest in a room full of people and suddenly everything goes quiet? That's not your fault. That's the tension Schopenhauer was talking about. You've touched a nerve. You've broken the fourth wall of reality, and now everyone is scrambling to stitch it back together. Because if what you said is true, then a lot of what they believe might be false. And that is unbearable. Most people don't want to know the truth, they want to be reassured. And if you won't reassure them, you become the problem. The outcast, the cynic, the heretic. Schopenhauer wasn't bitter, he was accurate. He understood that intelligent people are not hated because they're wrong, but because they're a mirror. And that mirror reflects not just the world's flaws, but the individual's complicity in it. And that is a hard thing to look at. So instead of changing, people attack the mirror. This is why Schopenhauer spent so much of his life in solitude. He knew that genius cannot flourish where conformity rules. He knew that depth cannot survive in the shallows. and he chose the price of truth over the comfort of belonging. So let me ask you something that might sting a little. Have you ever hidden your intelligence just to fit in? Have you ever dulled your thoughts to be more relatable? And if so, what did that cost you? Because Schopenhauer's message is this: your mind is not a burden, it's a gift. But the world will treat it like a threat. And your choice is simple: shrink yourself to make others comfortable, or stand tall and risk being alone. And that leads us to the deeper question Schopenhauer forces us to confront. If smart minds terrify the masses, then what is it exactly that the masses are so afraid of? What does intelligence expose that collective consciousness desperately wants to keep hidden? The high cost of truth, why honest thinkers are always unwelcome guests. Truth, as Schopenhauer knew all too well, is not merely inconvenient, it's dangerous. It doesn't just rearrange the furniture in people's minds. It tears down the whole house. And when you speak the truth, not the socially acceptable kind, not the politically packaged kind, but the raw, unfiltered, inconvenient kind, you don't get celebrated. You get rejected, misunderstood, silenced. Because truth doesn't just challenge ideas, it challenges identity. And that makes you, the truth teller, an existential threat to everyone still trying to believe in the play. Why are honest thinkers always unwelcome guests? Because they don't knock politely at the door of collective delusion. They break it open. They walk in without wiping their feet, dragging in the mud of reality, tracking it all over the pristine carpet of social norms. And the people inside? They don't thank you for showing them the truth. They kick you out for making them feel. That's what Schopenhauer was. An intellectual intruder. He wasn't trying to entertain or inspire or play the part of the friendly philosopher. He didn't offer hope. He offered clarity. And clarity hurts because it forces you to reckon with the lies you didn't even know you were living. Let's take a deeper look. In a world built on performance, where you are rewarded not for being authentic, but for being agreeable, the honest thinker is radioactive. They refuse to flatter power. They don't speak in euphemisms. They don't soften the blow. And so, the masses instinctively recoil, not because they understand what's being said, but because they feel the tremor of discomfort in the foundations of their borrowed beliefs. Schopenhauer once said, every truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. And if you're the one daring to say that truth, while it's still in the first 2 stages, you become the lightning rod, the scapegoat, the villain. Because society doesn't hate truth, it hates the truth-teller who speaks too soon. The masses don't want to hear that life is not a steady ascent of progress and purpose, but a swirling chaos of desire, disappointment, and momentary stillness. They don't want to hear that happiness isn't guaranteed, that meaning isn't delivered, that suffering isn't always avoidable. They want the illusion, the comforting myth that if you just try hard enough, smile big enough, believe deeply enough, you'll be okay. Schopenhauer shattered that illusion with brutal grace, and in doing so he alienated himself from the very world he sought to awaken. Because the cost of truth is exile. This is why so many intelligent people stay quiet. They sense, on a visceral level, that saying what they really think will not make them friends. It will make them suspects. You speak truth, and suddenly you're too negative. You're overthinking. You're difficult. And in those labels is a warning: conform or be cast out. Even in our so-called age of free speech, most people self and not because they lack opinions, but because they fear the price of honesty. But Schopenhauer didn't fear that price. He paid it. He lived in the shadow of rejection, ignored by academia, overshadowed by less radical minds. Yet he wrote anyway, because he understood that truth is not a popularity contest. It's a burden. a responsibility. A fire that either consumes you from the inside or forces you to speak regardless of the consequences. And yet, the paradox remains, the very truths that get you rejected in your time are often the ones future generations embrace as obvious. This is the lonely path of the honest thinker. You are mocked by your peers and quoted by their grandchildren. But in the moment, you're just another name they don't want to hear. Because your presence reminds them that the comfort they've built their lives around is made of sand. Let me ask you something personal. What truth have you been afraid to say out loud? Not because it's wrong, but because it might cost you something. A job, a friendship, a reputation. And now let me ask you this: what's the cost of not saying it? Of living your entire life in quiet compliance with stories you no longer believe in? That's the unbearable weight that people like Schopenhauer refuse to carry. He chose exile over betrayal, isolation over self-erasure, and in doing so he became more than a philosopher, he became a mirror. Not everyone liked what they saw in him, but those who were ready to see never forgot it. That's what separates the true thinkers from the clever performers. The true thinker is willing to be disliked if it means being honest. They don't say what sells. They say what matters, even if no one claps, even if the room goes silent, even if the price is solitude, because they know what Schopenhauer knew: truth has no audience requirement. It only needs one person brave enough to carry it. But carrying truth isn't just about speaking, it's about seeing. Seeing into the dark places others avoid, the flaws in the system, the hollowness in the rituals, the lies we call normal. And that kind of sight doesn't make life easier. It makes it harder, but also more real. Which leads us to the next paradox. Why do the most honest minds also tend to suffer the most? And is that suffering avoidable, or is it the price of true clarity? The pain of seeing too much. Why wisdom often comes with isolation. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with clarity. A grief that few talk about, because most people never reach the level of perception required to feel it. Arthur Schopenhauer did. He lived it. And if you've ever found yourself overwhelmed, not by the complexity of life, but by its painful simplicity, if you've ever looked out at the world and realized that most people are living in loops they didn't choose, chasing goals they didn't question, numbing pain they've never named, then you felt it too. It's the grief of seeing too much. The kind of sorrow that doesn't come from dramatic tragedy, but from a quiet, devastating awareness. Most people are asleep, and they don't want to wake up. And the more awake you become, the lonelier the road gets. Schopenhauer called this the metaphysical melancholy of the truly intelligent. The more deeply you understand life, the more you see suffering not as an exception but as a rule. And not just external suffering, poverty, death, conflict, but internal suffering. The anguish of wanting what you can't have. The torment of needing meaning in a universe that offers none. The crushing pressure of self-awareness in a world designed for distraction. This is the paradox. The mind that can pierce illusion often cannot protect itself from pain. The very sensitivity that allows you to see truth also makes you vulnerable to it. The average person, numbed by routine, sedated by entertainment, distracted by noise, has built psychic calluses. They don't feel the weight of the world because they don't look too closely. But when you start asking real questions, the questions Schopenhauer never stopped asking: what is the point of this? Why do we suffer? Why do we pretend otherwise? You step out of the crowd, and in that moment you realize truth doesn't unite, it isolates. This is why truly intelligent people often find themselves misunderstood, even feared. It's not that they speak in riddles. It's that they no longer share the same language of illusion. They no longer engage in the rituals of small talk, statusing, and superficial optimism. They're not depressed, they're aware. They're not cynical, they're honest. But in a world terrified of discomfort, honesty looks like hostility. Clarity feels like violence. And so, the intelligent mind begins to self-isolate, not out of arrogance, but out of self-preservation. Schopenhauer once said that the more a man knows, the more he suffers. That wasn't a poetic lament, it was a scientific observation of consciousness. Because to know more is not just to know more facts. It is to feel more, sense more, grieve more. It is to recognize the futility of certain ambitions, the emptiness of social roles, the horror of time passing without meaning. That kind of wisdom doesn't fit well in polite society. It makes people uncomfortable. And so the wise retreat not because they don't care, but because they care too deeply to pretend otherwise. But let's be clear, this isolation is not loneliness in the traditional sense. It's not the absence of company, it's the absence of resonance. You can be in a crowded room and still feel like a ghost. You can be surrounded by smiles and still ache for something real. Because once your eyes have adjusted to the light of truth, you can't go back to the shadows. You can't unsee the facade. You can't laugh at what used to amuse you or chase what once motivated you. You've crossed a threshold, and on the other side, things are quieter, but also clearer. So why go there at all? Why pursue this painful clarity if it leads to solitude, discomfort, and alienation? Because, as Schopenhauer understood, this kind of wisdom is not a choice, it's a calling. Once your mind starts to question, to probe, to dig through the layers of illusion, there's no turning back. The bell can't be unrung. And even if it hurts, even if it means walking alone, it also means walking free. Free from the manipulations of mass culture. Free from the psychological slavery of always needing to be happy. Free from the lie that suffering means failure. There is a quiet strength in those who suffer for truth, not because they enjoy it, but because they see it as the price of living without illusion. And that strength becomes a different kind of joy, a deeper one, not the sugar rush of validation, but the solid calm of authenticity, not the applause of the crowd, but the quiet nod you give yourself in the mirror, knowing you didn't look away. So the next time you find yourself drifting into solitude, feeling the ache of being too much in a world that prefers less, remember, you're not broken. You're just awake. And being awake in a sleeping world will always feel like grief at first. But that grief is sacred. It means you're still human. It means you still care. And if you stay with it, if you don't numb it, if you don't run, it transforms. From grief to insight, from pain to presence, from isolation to inner peace, which leads us to our final truth. What do you do with this wisdom once you have it? If the masses fear it, if society avoids it, if it costs you comfort, what's the purpose of seeing clearly at all? The silent revolution, how seeing clearly changes everything, even if no one notices. So here you are. You've seen too much to go back. You've outgrown the illusions. You've stopped pretending the noise is music, and you no longer want the things the world insists you should. And maybe you're wondering, what now? If the masses mock the truth, if society rewards the shallow and punishes the deep, if your clarity makes you a stranger even among friends, then what's the point of seeing clearly at all? Arthur Schopenhauer would say, it's not about being noticed, it's about being free. The revolution you're starting doesn't need a stage, a slogan, or a spotlight. It begins quietly in your own mind, in your choices, in your refusal to play the game you no longer believe in. This is the silent revolution, and it's the most powerful kind there is. Because once you start seeing clearly, your entire life begins to shift. Not always in ways the world understands. You might not get richer, you might not be praised, you might not fit in, but you will begin to reclaim yourself. You stop wasting energy chasing things that were never yours. You stop apologizing for your mind. You stop bargaining with people who only love the mask you used to wear. And even though you might still feel alone, something deeper starts to grow beneath that solitude, integrity. And with it, a kind of inner peace that no applause can give and no rejection can take away. Schopenhauer didn't offer comfort, and he didn't believe in utopias. What he offered was something far more enduring, lucid independence. He showed us that even in a world that misunderstands you, you can still live with dignity. You can still shape your life like a sculptor, not by adding more, but by subtracting the inessential. You can make your life a quiet protest against the superficial, a living rejection of shallow ambition and empty praise. And in doing so, you become the very thing the world needs most: a human being who is no longer afraid to seek clearly and live accordingly. The masses might not understand you. They may label you strange, cold, distant, difficult. But when you act from clarity instead of conformity, you become dangerous, not in the violent sense, but in the existential sense. You reveal an alternative. You remind people that freedom doesn't require permission. That truth doesn't require popularity. That depth doesn't need a crowd. And whether they admit it or not, your quiet defiance plants seeds. Some will reject them. Others, usually the ones who need it most, will find those seeds growing in their own minds weeks, months, even years later. So no, your revolution won't trend. It won't go viral. It won't be easy. But it will be real. And that reality will ripple through every part of your life, your work, your relationships, your thoughts. You'll stop craving what exhausts you. You'll stop defending what no longer serves you. You'll stop shrinking to fit into spaces you've already outgrown. And in that process, something incredible happens. You come home to yourself. Let me ask you this one last question. If no one ever noticed your clarity, if no one ever praised your insight, if your truth meant walking alone, would it still be worth it to see clearly? Because that's the real test. That's where freedom lies. And if your answer is yes, even quietly, even trembling, then you've already started the revolution. You don't need a podium. You need courage. You don't need permission. You need presence. You don't need to be understood. You need to be honest. And that, Schopenhauer would say, is the ultimate power: to walk through a world of illusion with your eyes wide open, and to keep walking anyway,